The Mermaid and the Opal Pearl. The Azure Abyss was a place of untold wonder and lurking mystery. A labyrinthine expanse where coral towers reached like frozen flames toward the dim sunlight above. It was a world few dared to explore fully, for the abyss was alive, with secrets that even the oldest merfolk feared. Neryssa, with her iridescent tail and flowing silver hair, was among the brave, or perhaps the foolish, who ventured into its depths. She wasn't seeking treasure, nor fleeing danger. Instead, she was drawn by an unshakable feeling, a whisper in her heart that urged her forward. The current felt different here, charged with an energy she couldn't name. The water shimmered with fleeting glints of light that dissolved when she turned her gaze. And the silence was broken only by the faint echo of her own heartbeat. Then she saw it, nestled within a crevice of the coral, as though placed there deliberately, was a pearl unlike any she had ever seen. It glowed faintly, its surface alive with swirling colors, blue as the sky before a storm, violet as twilight's first kiss, and gold like sunlight through a veil of water. The hues shifted and danced, forming shapes that almost resembled eyes, faces. Neryssa blinked, and the illusions were gone, leaving her unsure of what she had seen. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. The moment her skin brushed the pearl's surface, a warmth coursed through her, a sensation both comforting and strange. It wasn't the warmth of sunlight or fire, but something deeper, as though her very soul had been touched. She felt a pulse, a heartbeat that wasn't her own, thrum within the pearl. Neryssa held it closer, inspecting its impossible beauty. "What are you?" she murmured, her voice barely a ripple in the water. The pearl didn't answer in words. Instead, it sang. The sound was like nothing she had ever heard. It wasn't a song of notes or melodies, but something older, purer. It resonated in her mind, filling her with visions of places she didn't recognize. A garden of light and shadow, blossoms that shone like stars, and a tree with crystalline branches that stretched to infinity. She saw creatures of unimaginable beauty, swimming through currents of gold, their eyes glowing with wisdom beyond mortal comprehension. The visions faded, and Neryssa found herself gripping the pearl tightly, as though afraid it might slip away. Her heart raced. The images weren't just dreams. They felt real, urgent, and impossibly important. The pearl's song shifted, becoming a gentle pull in her mind. It wasn't a command, not exactly, but a guiding whisper. It wanted her to follow, to leave the safety of the reef and venture into the unknown. Her instincts, honed over years of navigating the treacherous waters of the abyss, screamed against the idea. The further one swam into the abyss, the fewer the stories of return. Yet, as she gazed at the pearl, she felt something she couldn't ignore. A promise. The promise of wonder, of discovery, and of answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask. With a final glance at the coral crevice that had hidden the pearl, Neryssa tucked it carefully into the pouch at her side. She swam upward, leaving the coral forest behind, and began her journey into deeper waters. The currents grew colder as she descended, the sunlight fading into a pale blue haze. The path ahead was uncertain, but the pearl song grew stronger, a constant hum that guided her as surely as the stars guided sailors above. Strange shapes moved in the shadows, some curious, others watchful, but none approached her. The pearl's glow seemed to keep them at bay, casting a halo of light that shimmered like a shield around her. Neryssa thought of the visions the pearl had shown her. Could such a garden truly exist, hidden within the ocean's endless expanse? And why had the pearl chosen her? These questions swirled in her mind as she swam deeper, following the song that now felt as though it were part of her. As the last vestiges of sunlight disappeared, the water around her darkened into a deep, endless blue. And yet, she felt no fear. The pearl's warmth remained constant, a quiet reassurance that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Somewhere in the infinite depths, something ancient awaited her, something miraculous. The deeper Neryssa swam, the stronger the pearl's song became. It was no longer a faint whisper in her mind, but a symphony of unearthly melodies resonating through her very soul. The song didn't just guide her, it shaped the world around her, sharpening her senses, making the water feel lighter and casting the shadowy abyss in hues of soft spectral light. The path was treacherous. The ocean floor, once smooth and familiar, now bristled with jagged rocks, draped in veils of dark, undulating kelp. The kelp swayed as if alive, reaching toward her with ghostly tendrils. She felt their curiosity, their ancient awareness, but the pearl's glow kept them at a respectful distance. In its light, nothing dared come too close. For hours, perhaps days, she swam, though time lost its meaning in the depths. Strange currents swept past her, carrying whispers she couldn't understand. The water grew colder, yet the pearl's warmth never faltered. It was as though the artifact created a cocoon of safety around her, a protective barrier between her and the alien world she was entering. Then she saw them, ruins. They rose from the seabed like the skeletons of giants, their crumbled spires and arches reaching vainly toward the surface. Moss and coral had claimed the structures, weaving their vibrant tendrils through every crack and crevice. Glyphs adorned the walls, their glowing edges faint but legible, as if some ancient power still lingered within them. Neryssa hesitated, her gaze sweeping over the ruins with both awe and caution. The pearl pulsed in her hand, insistent. "Go on," it seemed to urge, and the song shifted to a melody that was almost pleading. Neryssa swam through the ruins, her heart hammering as she passed weathered statues whose faces had been worn smooth by time. They seemed to watch her, even without eyes, their stoic forms an eerie reminder of what once was. At the center of the ruins stood a circular dais, partially buried beneath layers of sand and debris. The glyphs on the dais were brighter than any she had seen, their light flickering like trapped fireflies. She approached cautiously, and as she did, the Pearl's song reached a crescendo. Neryssa hesitated before stepping onto the dais. The water around her seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, she extended the pearl toward the dais's center, where a shallow indentation seemed made to cradle it. The moment the pearl touched the stone, the entire ruin came alive. Light surged through the glyphs, racing outward like veins carrying molten energy. The ground beneath her trembled, and the song of the pearl became a roar, filling the ocean around her with a symphony that was both beautiful and terrifying. Neryssa clutched the edges of the dais as the current around her grew wild and chaotic. The ruins shifted. No, not the ruins, the water itself. The currents parted, creating a path that spiraled downward into the ocean floor. The sand and debris scattered, revealing a tunnel of swirling light that led into the unknown. Neryssa hesitated. Every instinct told her to turn back, to return to the safety of the reefs she had left behind. Yet, the pearl's warmth urged her forward, reminding her of the visions she had seen. The garden, the crystalline tree, the promise of something miraculous. Taking a deep breath, she swam into the tunnel. The walls of light pulsed around her as she descended. Strange shapes swirled within the light. Creatures she couldn't recognize, their forms fleeting and dreamlike. They watched her but didn't speak. Their silent gazes filled with both curiosity and caution. At the end of the tunnel, the light faded, giving way to a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow her whole. But before fear could take root, the pearl flared brightly in her hand, casting its glow across a vast expanse. Neryssa's breath caught. She had entered another realm entirely. The water here shimmered like liquid starlight, and the seabed was a tapestry of glowing coral and flowers that radiated a soft, golden luminescence. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of a great tree, its crystalline branches reaching out like arms toward the heavens. The garden from her visions was real, and it was more magnificent than she could have imagined. The pearl song quieted, its once insistent melody becoming a gentle hum. It had led her here, to this sacred place, but Neryssa sensed her journey was far from over. Something deeper lay within this garden, something waiting for her. She swam forward, drawn to the crystalline tree that towered above the luminous blooms. The underwater garden stretched endlessly before Neryssa, a dreamscape of light and color that seemed to breathe with the ocean itself. Each bloom shimmered with a life of its own, their petals glowing softly as though kissed by moonlight. The water carried a fragrance, a mingling of sweetness and salt, rich and intoxicating. It was a fragrance that awakened distant memories in her mind. Laughter under the waves, songs sung in harmony, and the gentle embrace of her mother's arms. But even amidst the beauty, the place felt alive. The garden wasn't just a collection of luminous plants. It was aware. The crystalline tree stood at its heart, rising from a bed of white sand, so pristine, it glimmered like pearls. Its translucent branches caught the faint light from the flowers around it, refracting it into a kaleidoscope of colors that danced across the water. Neryssa couldn't tear her eyes away from the tree. It felt as though it were calling to her, not with words or melody, but with a presence so powerful it resonated through her very soul. As she swam closer, she noticed intricate carvings along the tree's trunk. They weren't the natural striations of crystal, but deliberate markings, etched with care by hands or fins that had long since vanished. The glyphs glowed faintly, their shapes shifting as she tried to read them. Each symbol seemed to pulse with a story, fragments of an ancient language that spoke of creation, loss, and something Neryssa could only describe as yearning. Her fingers brushed the smooth surface of the tree, and a jolt of energy shot through her. Images flooded her mind, too fast to grasp. A sea teeming with life, a garden untouched by time, and a light brighter than the sun, descending into the ocean's depths. She gasped and pulled her hand away, her heart pounding. The pearl, nestled in the pouch at her side, began to hum again. Its light seeped through the fabric, casting an ethereal glow that illuminated the space around her. Slowly it floated out of the pouch, rising toward the tree, as though pulled by an invisible thread. Neryssa watched, entranced, as the pearl settled into a hollow at the base of the trunk. The garden responded immediately. The flowers brightened, their glow spreading in waves that rippled across the seabed. The water grew warmer, the currents swirling with soft golden light. The tree itself began to hum, its branches trembling as though waking from a long slumber. Then the voices began. At first they were faint, barely discernible whispers carried on the currents. But as the garden awakened, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't voices of people, but something older, primal and vast. They spoke in a language Neryssa couldn't understand, yet their meaning resonated deep within her. "You have brought it back," they seemed to say. "The heart of the garden, the key to its life." Neryssa's eyes widened as she realized the truth. The Opal Pearl wasn't just a treasure. It was the core of this place, the source of its power and vitality. Without it, the garden had been dormant, its beauty fading into silence. By returning the pearl, she had restored its life. But with that realization came another truth. one that sent a chill through her despite the warmth of the water. The garden was not a sanctuary meant for all. It was a secret place, hidden for a reason. Its power was immense, but so too was its vulnerability. The garden needed more than a pearl to thrive. It needed a guardian. The whispers grew softer, fading into a single clear voice that filled Neryssa's mind. It was gentle yet firm, ancient yet full of life. "You have been chosen." Her breath caught. "Chosen for what?" she whispered, though no sound escaped her lips. The voice didn't answer in words. Instead, the garden itself responded. The tree's branches stretched toward her, their crystalline tips glowing with a soft golden light. The flowers around her opened wider, releasing a mist that shimmered like liquid stars. The light grew brighter, enveloping her in its embrace. Memories flooded her mind once more, but this time they weren't her own. She saw the garden as it once was, thriving under the care of beings who had long since faded into legend. She saw them tending to the flowers, singing songs that wove life into the water, and standing guard against forces that sought to claim the garden's power. She saw their final act of sacrifice, binding the garden's magic into the Opal Pearl and casting it into the ocean to protect it. They had known it would take centuries. One was her. The light began to dim, and the warmth of the garden's embrace settled into her heart. Neryssa knew without needing to be told that her life would never be the same. She had found the forgotten depths, but they had also found her. She swam closer to the tree, her hand brushing its trunk once more. This time she didn't pull away. The crystalline tree stood silent and still, yet its presence pulsed with life. Neryssa lingered beneath its towering boughs, mesmerized by the radiant blossoms that adorned its branches. Each flower glowed with a light that seemed to shift with her thoughts. Soft gold when she felt awe, deep violet when she pondered the unknown, and brilliant white when her heart swelled with wonder. The garden was alive, but more than that, it was aware. It felt her presence, and it responded not with words, but through the shimmering hues of its blooms and the subtle vibrations in the water. She was not merely an intruder here. She was an invited guest, though the weight of that invitation pressed heavily on her chest. As Neryssa swam closer to the tree, she noticed something extraordinary. Nestled among its branches were fruits unlike any she had ever seen. Translucent orbs that shimmered like captured starlight. Each fruit radiated a unique energy, and as she reached out toward one, the garden seemed to exhale softly, a warm current brushing against her skin. Her fingers hovered over a fruit that glowed with an inner fire, its light flickering like a heartbeat. The pearl, now nestled securely within the hollow at the tree's base, pulsed in rhythm with the fruit. A memory surfaced in her mind, unbidden, yet vivid. A young mermaid weeping in the shallows, her tears turning to pearls as she mourned her lost family. The fruit seemed to hum, as though sharing in that sorrow, offering its light as solace. "This place," Neryssa murmured, her voice trembling with reverence. "It's more than a garden. It's a keeper of memories." The tree responded, its branches swaying ever so slightly. The motion sent a cascade of soft light rippling through the garden, illuminating every corner with a warmth that seeped into her very being. Each flower, each fruit, each grain of sand seemed to hold a fragment of a story, a wish, a hope, or a dream from a soul long gone. The realization struck her with the force of a tidal wave. These weren't just fruits or flowers, they were miracles. The garden was a sacred place where the wishes of the lost and the forgotten were preserved, waiting for the right moment to bloom. But miracles, she knew, always came at a price. The thought weighed heavy in her mind as she swam around the tree, taking in its grandeur from every angle. At its base, the opal pearl continued to glow, its light syncing perfectly with the rhythmic hum of the garden. Neryssa reached out to touch the pearl, hoping for answers, and was met with another surge of visions. She saw the garden in its prime, vibrant and teeming with life, cared for by beings of immense power and wisdom. They tended to the fruits with gentle hands, ensuring that every miracle was born from pure intention. But then came the darkness, greedy forces that sought to claim the garden's power for themselves. The caretakers fought valiantly, but they were few, and the enemies were many. In their final act of desperation, the caretakers bound the garden's essence into the opal pearl, ensuring its survival but locking its magic away. The garden had waited ever since, dormant and hidden, for someone pure of heart to return the pearl and awaken it once more. As the vision faded, Neryssa sank to her knees, her hands trembling. "They gave everything," she whispered. "To protect this place, to protect its miracles." The garden hummed in agreement, the sounds soft and mournful. And then the voice returned. Not the fragmented whispers of before, but a clear, resonant tone that filled her mind. "The garden is alive again, thanks to you," the voice said. "But it is fragile. Its power will draw those who seek to exploit it. It must be guarded." Neryssa's heart tightened. "Guarded? By me?" The voice didn't answer, but the garden responded. The tree's blossoms flared brightly, their light enveloping her in a cocoon of warmth and serenity. The water shimmered with a golden glow, and the flowers around her began to bloom wider, their petals releasing tiny motes of light that danced like fireflies. A profound peace settled over her, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of what the garden was offering. It wasn't just asking her to protect it. It was offering her a place within its eternal beauty, a bond that would intertwine her very essence with its life force. Tears welled in her eyes as she gazed at the tree. If this is what I must do, if this is what I'm meant for, then I accept. The tree's light surged, and the garden itself seemed to sing, a chorus of joy and sorrow intertwined. Neryssa felt her body grow lighter, her form blending with the currents around her. She was no longer just a mermaid. She was becoming something more, a part of the garden itself. The fruits glowed brighter, their energy radiating outward as the garden bloomed in full glory. For the first time in centuries, the eternal bloom had returned, and with it, a new guardian to protect its miracles. The garden was alive in a way Neryssa had never felt before, its energy coursing through her as though she had become one with the crystalline tree itself. The luminous blooms surrounding her pulsed gently, their light casting shimmering patterns that danced along the seabed. The fruits on the tree's branches glowed brighter with every passing moment. Each orb a vessel for a wish, a hope or a dream waiting to be fulfilled. Neryssa floated in a serene trance, her heart swelling with the beauty and magic of the garden. Yet beneath the wonder, a quiet unease began to stir. The garden's voice had gone silent, its guiding whispers replaced by an all-encompassing stillness. She reached out to touch the tree again, seeking clarity. But this time, no visions came. Only a deep and growing awareness settled over her. The garden had awakened fully, and its miracles would no longer remain hidden. For the first time, she noticed the currents shifting beyond the garden's boundaries. Dark shadows moved in the distance, flickering just at the edge of her vision. The pearl's glow, steady and constant until now, began to waver, as though responding to an approaching threat. The garden, alive and vulnerable, was calling to the world, and the world, greedy and restless, was beginning to answer. Neryssa's heart clenched as she swam to the edge of the garden, her gaze fixed on the shadows beyond. Creatures of the abyss, some familiar, others monstrous in their strangeness, circled just outside the boundary of light. Their movements were deliberate, almost hesitant, as though they were testing the invisible barrier that kept them at bay. The warmth of the garden faltered, a subtle chill creeping into the water around her. She turned back toward the tree, her mind racing. The garden had chosen her, but the weight of that choice was beginning to press heavily on her shoulders. Could she protect this place against forces that sought to exploit it? Could one soul, no matter how pure, stand against the tide of greed and darkness that would surely come? The pearl pulsed weakly in response to her doubts, and she understood. The garden's magic was vast, but it was not infinite. It thrived on balance, on the harmony of giving and taking, of miracles granted and sacrifices made. For the garden to remain alive, it needed more than a guardian. It needed a price to be paid, Neryssa swam back to the tree, her hands trembling as she pressed them against its glowing trunk. "What must I do?" she whispered, her voice carrying through the stillness. The tree's light dimmed, and for a moment she thought it might not answer. But then the garden responded, not in words, but in feeling. A wave of warmth enveloped her, followed by a profound sadness that settled deep in her chest. The truth was clear. The garden's magic required her life, not as a loss, but as a transformation. She would no longer exist as she was, but as part of the eternal bloom, her essence woven into the garden itself. Her first instinct was fear. She thought of her family, her home, and the life she had left behind to follow the pearl's call. But as the warmth of the garden deepened, the fear began to fade. She saw the fruits glowing above her, each one a miracle waiting to be born. And she understood that her sacrifice would ensure the hopes and dreams of others would flourish. Her life would become part of something far greater than herself. The garden's light brightened as if sensing her acceptance. The pearl, nestled at the base of the tree, pulsed one final time before dissolving into a cascade of shimmering particles that flowed upward into the tree's branches. The fruit glowed brighter, their light expanding until the entire garden shimmered with a golden radiance. Neryssa closed her eyes and let the transformation take her. Her form dissolved into the currents, her essence merging with the garden in a dance of light and energy. She felt no pain, only peace. A profound and all-encompassing serenity as her spirit became one with the eternal bloom. The shadows beyond the garden hesitated, then receded, as though they could sense the garden's new strength. The luminous blooms glowed with renewed vitality, their light forming an unbreakable barrier that protected the sacred space. And so, the garden thrived once more, its miracles preserved, its magic safeguarded. Sailors and merfolk alike would one day tell stories of the glowing depths, where a guardian's sacrifice ensured that hope and wonder would never fade. And deep within the garden, beneath the crystalline tree, a faint song could be heard, a melody carried by the currents, gentle and eternal. It was the voice of Neryssa, singing to those who dared to dream, a reminder that miracles always came at a price.